Look at the all-time great seasons from Heisman Trophy winners, it can be hard to compare which ones are more impressive or better than the others for a number of reasons. The most prominent reason would probably be position, since it's hard to compare a quarterback's Heisman season to a running back's Heisman season. But even with arguments between players who play the same position, there's still other factors like the competition they play, the offensive scheme they're a part of, and the players they play with on their team. Out of all the Heisman seasons though, there are few more impressive than that of Cam Newton and Tim Tebow. These two guys have such similar attributes that it'll be hard to figure out which one of their seasons was better, but that is what we will be doing in this video. Two quarterbacks who were extremely productive, who not only won the Heisman Trophy, but were also national champions. In this video, we will look at all parts of their Heisman seasons and try to find out who had the more impressive season. So let's get into it. So we'll start with Tim Tebow and then move on to Cam. But one thing that I want to mention about both of these guys before we get into their seasons is that they both were extremely productive in the rushing and passing game, which is what made them so great. In fact, besides Lamar Jackson, Tim Tebow and Cam Newton are the only quarterbacks ever to rush and pass for 20 touchdowns in a regular season. So I just wanted to share that because that is a super impressive fact, especially with the quarterback position being revolutionized in today's college football. But now let's get into Tim Tebow's Heisman season. Of course, the main hit on Tim Tebow when comparing his Heisman season to Cam's is that he did not win a national championship in the same season he took home the Heisman. But team success aside, we will be focusing on the personal success and impact that these two players achieved. So the 2007 Florida Gators were actually the defending national champions, as they had won the BCS National Championship the year before. But they were led by quarterback Chris Leak, and Tim Tebow was just a freshman that year. Now with the departure of Chris Leak, this was Tim Tebow's team, and he was physically, mentally, and vocally more than capable of becoming a leader for this program. Side note before we move further, guess who the backup quarterback to Tim Tebow was during that 2007 season? It was Cam Newton, which is crazy. I'm sure most of y'all watching the video know about Cam Newton's college journey, but the fact that two of the greatest single seasons we have ever seen came from two guys who were on the same team and played the same position is absolutely wild to me. If you don't know Cam's college journey, I'll briefly go over it when we get to him, but for now let's just get back into Tim Tebow. So coming off the national championship, expectations were high for Tim, but he was more than up for the challenge. The first 3 games of the season were a cakewalk as they secured dubs over Western Kentucky, Troy, and 22nd ranked Tennessee. It was in week 4 that they were met with their first form of adversity. Going into the game, the Gators were ranked 3rd, which was the highest ranking they would achieve all year, and they were going up against an unranked Ole Miss team in Oxford. What was supposed to be a walk in the park turned out to be a hard-fought battle, but they managed to slide by 1 touchdown. A close call for the Gators, and for the first time during the season, they looked like a team that could be beat. Traditionally, after a team almost loses to a team that they should handle fairly easily, they come out the next week and manhandle their opponent in order to regain that respect that they had before their near slip-up and show people why they were touted as one of the best teams in the land. And good thing for Florida, they had the perfect chance to do this since they were playing an unranked Auburn team in the swamp at home. A pretty good opportunity to pick up a win before going into Death Valley the next week to play what would eventually be number 1 ranked LSU. Unfortunately, they could not secure a dub against this Auburn team, and the Tigers ended up pulling off a huge upset in Gainesville with the final score being 20-17. The Gators took a slight hit in the polls and slipped down to number 9 in the rankings. However, their focus was not on their ranking or even on the loss to Auburn, but rather on their next opponent, which was number 1 ranked LSU. With the recent loss, all eyes were on Florida, and everyone was eager to see how they would respond, and more specifically, how Tim Tebow would respond. Unfortunately, they could not pull out the victory, but they made it close with the final score being 28-24. Considering this was the best team in college football and it was in Death Valley, this margin of victory was respectable, but it still meant that Florida would take another hit in the polls. They slipped down to number 14 in the polls, but the next week presented yet another opportunity to gain some respect back. Their opponent going into the next week would be 8th ranked Kentucky, and the game would be in Lexington, and with the Gators having 2 straight losses, this was a must-win situation for the team. Thankfully, in an offensive shootout, Tim Tebow led the Gators to a 45-37 victory over the Wildcats. However, the next week, they played 19th ranked Georgia and lost to them 42-30. Not a good look for Tim Tebow and his team, and it cost them even more spots in the rankings, and they slipped all the way down to number 18. But they got it together in the last 4 games of the season, and Tim Tebow had this offense rolling as they averaged over 50 points a game for the last 4 games and ended the year with a final regular season record of 9-3. Because of the late season rally, the Gators had regained some spots in the polls and were now ranked 9th going into bowl season. They were picked to play Michigan in the Capital One Bowl and unfortunately lost that game by a touchdown, which left them with a final record of 9-4 on the year. Alright, so now that we have gone over how the Gators did, let's see how the Heisman winner did during this season. In 13 games, he had a completion percentage of 67 and had 234 pass completions for 3,286 yards and 32 passing touchdowns. Along with that, he had 210 rushing attempts for 895 yards and an additional 23 rushing touchdowns on the year, which means that he had a total of 55 touchdowns, and that level of offensive production is ridiculous. The stat line earned him so many awards and honors, and when I say so many awards and honors, I'm talking about 28 different awards and honors. I'm not going to read every single one of them, but I do want to highlight a few. Of course, the Heisman Trophy, which is the most prestigious award in college football, and is the reason he is even in this video. There's also the James E. Sullivan Award, which is given to the top amateur athlete, and that award is eligible to all athletes on all levels. So that is super impressive that Tim took that trophy home. Then there's the ESPY Award for the top male college athlete, and about every other award he could have possibly won. Taking a look at the numbers again, Tim Tebow had 4,181 total yards and 55 total touchdowns. And the reason I reiterate that is because we will eventually directly compare those numbers to Cam's in a little bit. So now that we have taken a look at Tim Tebow's season, let's move on to Cam. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that I would briefly go over Cam's college journey, so here it is. He committed to the University of Florida and was a freshman in 2007. He was the backup to Tim Tebow, which is wild. He played out his full freshman season in 2007, and then in November of 2008, he was arrested on felony charges of burglary, larceny, and obstruction of justice for trying to purchase a stolen laptop from another student. So, because of that, he got suspended for the rest of the 2008 season, but was able to come back for the 2009 season. When he returned to the Gators for the 2009 season, so did another quarterback, Tim Tebow. Seeing as though Cam would go his 3rd year in college without playing, he decided to transfer to Blinn Community College in Texas. At Blinn College, Cam beasted out and led the team to an NJC Dubl-A championship and became the number 1 ranked JUCO player in his class. He gets a ton of offers flooding in and decides to commit to Auburn University. Okay, so we have covered how he got to Auburn, and now we're going to look at how he and his team did during the 2010 season. Right off the bat, when comparing Cam's season to Tim's, Cam obviously had the better season from a team standpoint. I'm not saying that he obviously had the best individual season, but from strictly a team success standpoint, he definitely had the better year. So the 2010 Tigers started out the year ranked 22nd, and going over this season will be a much simpler process than going over Florida's season because Auburn did not lose 1 game. Although there were a number of close calls, the Tigers managed to go undefeated. Looking at the close games that probably could have gone either way, there was the Week 2 game against Mississippi State, which was a 3-point game. And then they had another 3-point game against an unranked Clemson the very next week. But a win is a win, and their first big challenge did not come until Week 8 when they went into Death Valley and defeated 6th ranked LSU 24-17. However, nothing will top what he did in the 2010 Iron Bowl in what was most likely the game of the year that season. Alabama jumped out to a 24-0 lead at one point in the first half, and it looked like Auburn's perfect season would be ruined. But my man, Cameron Newton, refused to let that happen and came out in the second half with the mindset that Auburn would be walking home with the W. He led this team all the way back, and the final score ended up being 28-27. Without a doubt, Cam had just had one of those career-defining moments, and this performance was most likely what most people refer to as his Heisman moment. After that game, they played South Carolina for the second time that year in the SEC championship game and destroyed them 56-17. And with that win, they had earned a spot in the 2010 BCS National Championship. And as most of y'all know, in what was a great game, Auburn secured the victory over Oregon 22-19. So a great season for the Tigers, and now we'll take a look at the man who ran the offense responsible for that perfect season, Cam Newton. He ended the year with a 67% completion percentage, along with 2,854 passing yards and 30 passing touchdowns. Along with this, he added 1,473 rushing yards and 20 rushing touchdowns. This gave him 51 total touchdowns on the season, and like Tim Tebow, earned a great number of awards. It wasn't 28 different awards like Tim, but there was still a long list of accolades that Cam won. The number was somewhere around 20, and the notable award that I will point out was the Heisman. Along with the Heisman, he won about every other award that a college quarterback could win. Taking a look back at his numbers, he ended the 2010 season with 4,327 total yards and 51 total touchdowns. And if you remember Tim Tebow's numbers from the 2007 season, these numbers are extremely similar. In fact, if we put both of these numbers side by side, you can see that no player has the edge because Cam has the slight edge in total yards, but Tim has the slight edge in total touchdowns. Alright, so now that we have looked at each of their seasons and their stats for the year, it's time to decide which player had the best Heisman season. And like I mentioned way earlier in the video, these guys were both so similar in that they both played quarterback in the SEC and were both dual threat guys who contributed heavily to the passing and rushing game. Not only that, but their numbers, as we just saw, were also practically the same. However, with everything that these guys have in common, there are some things that separate them. For instance, during Tim's Heisman season, the dude had a little more help as he played alongside 8 other future NFL players, excluding himself and Cam Newton. But Cam did not have the help that Tim had as he played alongside only 3 future NFL players. Additionally, this can somewhat relate to the amount of NFL players on the team, but Florida, unlike Auburn, is a major powerhouse program. To put in perspective how great they were, Tim Tebow won 2 national championships there as the Gators took home the title in 2006 when he was a freshman and 2008 when he was a junior. But when Cam won that national championship for Auburn in 2010, it was only the second in program history, and it looks like it could be that way for a while. So that being said, it definitely builds Cam's resume more for the best Heisman season because without him, Auburn does not win that championship in 2010, opposed to Florida, who possibly could have won without Tim Tebow. So since the numbers between these guys are so similar, along with the fact that they played in the same conference with very similar schedules, I have no choice but to look at team success instead of personal achievement, and in that category, there is one team that was clearly better, which are the Auburn Tigers. If we look at Florida going into that 2007 season, they were the defending national champs, and because of that, expectations were very high for the season. Although a 9-4 record is considered a good year for almost any team, it was considered an underachievement for the Gators. This is almost the opposite of what went down at Auburn during that 2010 season. That team was coming off a mediocre 8-5 year, and expectations for the team were really not that high. So when they brought in Cam and he, with really not that much help around him, dragged that team all the way to the national championship and won, that to me is a more successful season for Cam, even though both players had great individual seasons. So in conclusion, just because of what he was able to do for his team, I think that the better Heisman season goes to Cam Newton. Again, both players had an outstanding year, and it's not like Tim Tebow never won a championship either. That is exactly what he did in the very next year after he won the Heisman. But the fact that Cam put everything together in his one and only season at Auburn, including that national championship, is more credible in my eyes. Alright guys, I hope y'all enjoyed the video, and if you did, please like and share the video as that helps the channel to grow. Besides that, until next time.